Aviation experts just dropped a bombshell about the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and it's terrifying. The plane once hyped as the future of air travel is hiding secrets that could shatter Boeing's reputation. Behind the glossy brochures and luxury promises lie flaws so dangerous, they make you question how this jet was ever allowed to fly. And honestly, for airlines, the concept of Boeing 787 was irresistible. They promised a 20% boost in fuel efficiency, a number so big that executives saw dollar signs with every mile flown. For passengers, the Dreamliner was packaged like a luxury experience in the sky. Quieter engines meant less fatigue. Lower cabin altitude meant less jet lag, and higher humidity meant long-haul flights wouldn't feel like sitting in a desert. But here's what passengers and investors weren't told. This dream was fragile from the very beginning. Building a jet out of composites wasn't like bolting together sheets of aluminum. Every single fastener, joint, and section had to line up with microscopic precision. If even one connection was slightly off, it wasn't a small cosmetic issue. Over time, those imperfections could grow into structural cracks, weakening the entire frame of the aircraft. Unlike metal, composites don't bend. They don't dent. They fail silently, and when they fail catastrophically. The glossy marketing never mentioned that reality. And inside Boeing, not everyone was celebrating. Behind the press conferences and ribbon cuttings, there were insiders who knew the scale of production Boeing was promising simply didn't match the precision the Dreamliner required. Some engineers quietly warned that perfection on thousands of aircraft rushed down the assembly line was impossible. And they were right. And if you thought that was bad, wait until you hear what happened when those quiet warnings were ignored. The first cracks didn't take long to appear. Reports began to surface from inside Boeing's factories about misaligned fuselage sections, sloppy joints, and rushed work. Pieces of the aircraft that were supposed to fit seamlessly often didn't, leaving tiny gaps where there should have been none. Instead of halting production and fixing the problems, Boeing pressed forward. Demand was too high, and the company was under pressure to deliver planes faster than ever before. And this is where the hidden story of the Dreamliner gets even darker. Boeing's own internal inspections were already flagging these problems. Quiet checks revealed that tolerance levels weren't being met, that key sections weren't lining up the way they should. Yet those warnings were quietly swept aside. Engineers who spoke up were ignored, sometimes sidelined, sometimes even silenced. The culture inside Boeing was shifting. Safety wasn't the top priority anymore, speed was. In January 2013, less than 2 years after the Boeing 787 entered service, the so-called Dreamliner faced its first nightmare. On January 7th, a Japan Airlines 787 parked at Boston's Logan Airport caught fire while connected to external power. Just 9 days later, on January 16th, another 787 operated by All Nippon Airways was forced to make an emergency landing in Takamatsu, Japan, after cockpit indicators showed smoke from its battery system. By that day, the Federal Aviation Administration had seen enough. The FAA issued an unprecedented order, grounding the entire global fleet of 50 Dreamliners. And that grounding was supposed to be the wake-up call, but instead, it was just the opening act. This wasn't a small technical hiccup. Lithium-ion batteries, the very heart of the Dreamliner's electrical system, were supposed to be a technological leap forward, lighter and more powerful than traditional nickel-cadmium units. But Boeing hadn't tested them under realistic operational conditions. Internal documents later revealed that cost-cutting decisions led to a design that bypassed certain redundant safety features, all in the name of saving weight and money. Instead of extensive field testing, Boeing leaned on lab simulations and optimistic projections. The result? Batteries that could overheat, leak flammable electrolytes, and trigger thermal runaway. Exactly what regulators witnessed in Boston and Takamatsu. What's even more damning is how Boeing framed the crisis. Executives branded the fires as a one-off problem, a technical nuisance that had already been fully contained. But experts inside and outside the company weren't convinced. John Goglia, a former member of the National Transportation Safety Board, warned at the time that these fires were the tip of the iceberg for a rushed program that cut corners from the start. Investigators in Japan later confirmed that Boeing had relied on a single supplier, GS Yuasa, for the battery packs, and that oversight of their production processes was minimal. This was not an accident. It was the direct result of Boeing's obsession with keeping costs low and deliveries on schedule. The fix Boeing rushed out was telling. They didn't redesign the battery from the ground up. Instead, they added containment boxes lined with stainless steel to trap fires if, or rather when, they happened again. It was less a solution than a patch job, but it was enough to get the FAA to lift the grounding order in April 2013. To passengers, the Dreamliner returned to service looking exactly the same, but inside its fuselage was a jury-rigged compromise that spoke volumes about the program's real priorities. The aircraft marketed as innovative had, in reality, been rushed into the skies unfinished. And if Boeing thought slapping a metal box around a fire hazard counted as innovation, they were only fooling themselves. Fast forward to 2025, and the nightmare was back, this time with a far more terrifying discovery. In March 2025, the FAA issued a new airworthiness directive targeting one of the Dreamliner's most critical structures, the forward pressure bulkhead. This isn't just another panel or bracket. The forward bulkhead is the structural wall behind the cockpit that holds cabin pressure when the aircraft climbs to cruising altitude. At 40,000 feet, its integrity is the difference between a normal flight and instant disaster. The FAA's findings were chilling. Inspections revealed misaligned fasteners, improperly sized gaps, and structural weaknesses in multiple aircraft, flaws that could grow into cracks under repeated cycles of pressurization and depressurization. Engineers warned that a compromised bulkhead could mean sudden decompression, structural collapse, or even the loss of the aircraft in midair. These weren't isolated errors. According to the FAA's directive, similar problems were discovered across several Dreamliners, suggesting a systemic issue baked into Boeing's manufacturing process. What makes this scandal worse is that experts inside Boeing allege the company knew about these flaws years before regulators did. Whistleblowers have since claimed that internal audits raised red flags about bulkhead assembly tolerances as early as 2020, during the period when Boeing had already paused Dreamliner deliveries over fuselage defects. Instead of halting production completely, Boeing pressed ahead, delivering aircraft while quietly hoping the flaws wouldn't escalate. And just when you think Boeing couldn't possibly gamble any harder with passenger safety, here comes the kicker. In fact, Boeing had already been operating what insiders called shadow factories, off-site facilities dedicated to reworking Dreamliners that rolled off the production line with defects. Dozens of undelivered aircraft were stored for months, even years, waiting for structural corrections before airlines could fly them. Yet the forward bulkhead issue wasn't disclosed publicly until March 2025, when the FAA forced Boeing's hand with a mandatory directive. By then, hundreds of Dreamliners were already flying worldwide with structural component regulators now described as potentially unsafe. Boeing responded quickly with what it described as a software patch. But airlines like Qatar Airways publicly admitted the fix didn't work. Their pilots continued to experience random communication dropouts even after the update. Aviation safety experts pointed out that VHF radios are the backbone of civil aviation, the one link between pilots and controllers in congested skies. Losing that link, even briefly, is not a nuisance. It's a life-and-death vulnerability. Yet Boeing downplayed the problem, treating it as a technical hiccup rather than a crisis. Internally, the company maintained that the failures posed no immediate danger. But pilots flying those aircraft had a different perspective. Quietly, many admitted they were forced to improvise when radios went dead, relying on backup systems or timing workarounds to re-establish contact. A minor bug on paper became a moment of panic in real cockpits. The deeper truth behind these mounting issues could be traced back not to rivets or radios, but to Boeing's culture itself. Before 1997, Boeing was an engineers company. Its boardrooms were filled with aerospace veterans who had risen through the ranks designing aircraft like the 747 and the 737. Safety and precision were the company's obsession, and its reputation was built on decades of technical rigor. And then came the 1997 merger with McDonnell Douglas, the point where Boeing basically swapped engineers for accountants in the boardroom. That changed in 1997, when Boeing merged with McDonnell Douglas. Slowly but unmistakably, the culture shifted. Finance executives began to dominate leadership, pushing production speed and quarterly profits over engineering discipline. Outsourcing exploded, with key components sent to dozens of global suppliers, some with little or no aerospace background.